Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
September 21, 2020. The FinCen Documents Released Edition. And we have several stories about that, starting with the New York Times. A cache of thousands of reports that major banks filed with federal regulators help show how they aided suspected terrorists, drug dealers, and corrupt foreign officials move trillions of dollars around the world, despite the bank's compliance concerns about the suspicious nature. The documents obtained by BuzzFeed and shared with a consortium of journalists. These are suspicious activity reports, which the banks are required to file with FinCen. What are the documents revealed? Well, J.P. Morgan allowed a company to move $1 billion through a London account without knowing who owned it. Evidence that Putin's closest associates used Barclay banks to avoid sanctions that were meant to stop them using financial services in the West. The UK itself is a high-risk jurisdiction because over 3,000 UK companies are named in the FinCen files. United Arab Emirates Central Bank failed to act on warnings about a local firm which was being used to help evade Iranian sanctions. Deutsche Bank, always in the news, moved money launderers' dirty money for organized crime, trafficker, and terrorist. Standard Chartered moved cash for an Arab bank for more than a decade after the client's accounts at the Jordanian bank had been determined for using funding terrorism. These FinCen documents are different than some of the other Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, Swiss Leaks, Lux Leaks, because they are not just from 1 or 2 companies, but from a number of banks. They highlight a range of potential suspicious activity involving companies and individuals, and also raise questions about what banks had noticed these and why they didn't take action. FinCen says, of course, that this release of information will hurt national security, but it's hard to believe it will hurt national security since FinCen doesn't seem inclined to do anything. One of the interesting things, as reported by the BBC, is that HSBC moved Ponzi scheme millions through its Hong Kong branch in 2013 and 2014. In its role, some $80 million of alleged fraud is detailed in these accounts. HSBC, of course, claims it met its legal obligations, but that is very far cry from meeting your compliance obligations. Lawyers for the individual duped investors say the bank should have acted sooner to close the fraudster's account. The documents leaked include a series of other revelations, such as suggesting one of U.S. banks may have helped a notorious mobster move more than $1 billion. So very black eye day, once again, for banks behaving badly. This release of SARs, or suspicious activity reports, demonstrates that the bank's compliance systems are in large part working, but even though the banks themselves are flagging these, either these flags are not investigated or they're being overridden by the business side of things, who wants, of course, the transaction fees. And until banks really are penalized in the amounts of transactions fees that they are generating, we're probably not going to see any real change. So really interesting day for banks and banks behaving badly, part 385. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.